Here's your host, Deborah Duncan.
The University of Houston Cougars men's basketball team is on the prowl for their second Final Four in the last 4 years. They have to get through some other games first, but this isn't their first dance in the NCAA playoffs. Have you ever wondered how the game of basketball even started? Historian Raffi Andonian shared the game's history and the role Houston teams played, from Phi Slamma Jamma to the Houston Rockets. Raffi, you were raised in L.A., and so we were one of those kids that was curious by nature. No surprise that you're a historian.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, history to me is, in a way, the study of everything. Everything has a history, and everything changes over time and has an evolution of how it gets to where it does. So being a curious person, I really enjoyed history growing up.
Yeah. Why is it so important that we know it?
Because it helps you understand how and why things are the way around you, not just in social structures, but also in your belief systems, in things that you do for, for yourselves, for entertainment, such as basketball.
Yeah.
There's a story behind it and how it got there, and that reveals a lot about what we think and how we respond and how we identify as we learn that, and especially asking the question how and why.
Yeah, and there's so much more to the story than we think, right? Like, you can look at sports and say, okay, sports is just entertainment. Basketball is just basketball. It's a whole lot more than that. You love basketball. You just love it because you played it as a kid. But let's go to how basketball even got started.
Basketball started in the 1890s, so everyone knows Naismith, the Naismith Hall of Fame, which is in Massachusetts. Now, he was actually Canadian, and he initially studied theology. It's kind of funny. A lot of people that are kind of breakthrough thinkers and innovators in history seem to have studied theology. Yeah. There's something about the inquiry or something that leads to creativity. But he came to graduate school in the U.S., and in Massachusetts he was studying PE, physical education, which was a new field at the time. And they were looking for a winter sport, and that's indoors. Of course, basketball is played in a gym, and would keep people physically active in the winter months. Now remember, you're in the Northeast, so you got to stay inside. Yeah. And so that's how basketball first gets developed. It looked very different than it does today. So for example, what we would see as a full court, they would play on something more like about half the size of a court today, and a lot more players on there, about 9 people on each side, because that's how many he had in the gym. So 18 people crowded into what we would consider half court. It's pretty hard to imagine, a different game entirely.
Yeah, and things have, of course, changed over the decades, right? The dribbling, coaches, team
right.
size.
Yeah, so initially you couldn't dribble.
Right?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So netball, believe it or not, women's basketball started early in the 1890s, a version of women's basketball. And Smith College, which is in Massachusetts, nearby there, kind of got exported eventually to Great Britain, where netball is played today. And it's a little bit closer to that original basketball. Netball was seen as more friendly to women, partly because you weren't supposed to charge each other. You were restricted to certain zones. This is beliefs. You were talking about earlier about the value of history. Yeah. The basketball game in that case reflected the beliefs of society, which is that a woman shouldn't overly exert herself even when she's acting physically.
We
That's
can
right.
give childbirth and do all kinds of other things, but please don't overly exert yourself. Yeah.
But yes, the way they got around the dribble thing that I think is so fascinating is that initially you had to pass. You couldn't bounce the ball. Well, dribbling is actually passing to yourself. So that's how they get around it and add that rule, for example. Very different game than today. But the idea of getting the ball in the hoop is the fundamental thing that ties the game together.
And basketball has had such a large role in influence of society. You just touched on it with the women, right? And we still have that conversation of, women in pro sports, the WNBA, women in basketball. We know here in Houston, the Houston Comets, were the first championship.
The highest winning percentage season was by the Houston Comets in WNBA history. For example, Cheryl Swoops, of course, the first WNBA pick, which is really fascinating to think about. You have Cynthia Cooper. Both of these women on the Houston Comets multiple times were WNBA MVPs. They won WNBA championship. Both won in college as NCAA titles, and of course contributing to championships here.
And then Cooper, the Hall of Fame, right?
That's right, Hall of Famers, and of course Olympic medalists as well. And so establishing the rich legacy of basketball here in Texas.
Yeah, I actually sang the national anthem at the championship, and I missed a word, and it was like somebody's like, whatever happened to proof? I was like, okay, well, yeah. The sound system went out, right? Mentioning how important it is in so many areas. One is, validating women in pro sports, but the other is the whole civil rights movement. I'm going to start with Bill Russell in 1960.
Bill Russell is an ultimate figure, and he only recently passed away. Now, I want to say, though, as we're talking about civil rights and sports, that let's remember that even in the 1890s, when women were playing that early version of basketball that later became netball, yes, there were restrictions because they're women. However, the fact that they were having letting women participate in sports is a civil rights advancement.
Right.
And I want to carry that theme over into the racial civil rights that you're talking about in the 1960s, because basketball was at the center of that. Now, Bill Russell was a guy that grew up, he watched his father, he was in line at a gas station and was supposed to wait for all the white patrons to get served first. And when he decided he was going to go to a different gas station, not protest it, but go to a different gas station, they threatened him to stay there with a shotgun, saying, you don't leave until you wait your turn. Wow. This is someone whose mother wore a nice dress and was told she's wearing a white lady's dress and was scolded for that. So that's the background Bill Russell's coming in with. Of course, an 11-time champion, including 8 in a row. So he's a huge basketball figure. And this is the key moment. In 1967 is when Muhammad Ali, the boxer, boxing is another one that's at the center of civil rights. The protests going to Vietnam. Jim Brown from the NFL legend for the Cleveland Browns, holds the Cleveland Summit in Cleveland. And when he does so, he has other top athletes come around. Bill Russell is one of them. And that's where they decide to have a series of resolutions supporting Muhammad Ali and Bill Russell, kind of brainy person as well as athletic. Shows you that you can do both. You don't have to be either or. That's something that was inspiring to me as a kid.
In fact, he got the Presidential Medal of Freedom.
That's right. He got the Presidential Medal of Freedom for his civil rights stuff that he did. Now, who else was also there in the 1967 summit was, of course, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. At the time, Lou Alcindor changed his name to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar.
Another brainiac. Yeah.
That's right, another brainiac. Also a multi-time author. He ended up writing some books later on Black history. Now, talk about a champion. He was an NCAA champion, too. He was an author, too. He also, of course, was multiple-time NBA champion and was an all-time leading point scorer in the NBA history until last year when LeBron James broke it. But he was there for almost 40 years. And so when someone like that, who also won championships at UCLA, so in 1967, 68, he's in college, part of a series of championships that his coach John Wooden won 10 of the 11 titles, and Kareem was the part of 3 in a row, so a big figure in amateur sports. And what does Kareem Abdul-Jabbar do? He boycotts the 1968 Olympics because he said, I didn't want to play for a country that I'm going to come home and face oppression for representing. So in that regard, Kareem really puts himself forward as a young guy in civil rights as well. And these are the kinds of things. And willing to risk it, exactly. But one of the things I really want to emphasize here, between both Bill Russell and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, is that they're both also not just using sports, but using their scholastic abilities, going to schools, writing authors, taking very strong positions. That matters too. Really important to develop both mind and body.
They didn't just take a stand, they could eloquently explain why they were taking a stand.
That's exactly right.
All right, speaking of champs, Texas Western.
We're talking about in the same kind of cluster of years. In 1966, they are the first NCAA team to have an all-black starting 5. Texas Western, which is now UTEP, goes to the NCAA title and wins it against Kentucky, which is an all-white team. Now, this is really important because Kentucky, to this day, is the all-time winningest program. So to beat a program like that.
And here's the thing, and this is where sports kind of levels the playing field. They chose their players based on their ability.
That's right.
Not just because someone was black or white. It was like, we just need the best player.
Now in basketball, what you're seeing is, hey, wait a minute, you don't have this superior race that's supposed to, if you put them on the court performing, it's made the best person win. Now it's really important that it was against Rupp at Kentucky. Rupp, to this day, is Rupp Arena in Kentucky. He's a coach that this stuff is named after. So a legend of the sports gets defeated. And that helps integrate college basketball, especially in the South, especially in the SEC, which Kentucky is a part of.
Stop the madness. No, actually bring on the madness, and we'll bring on March Madness.
Yeah, March Madness, believe it or not, starts in high school basketball in Illinois. Now we think of, basketball starts in the Northeast, as I mentioned, but much of the upper Midwest kind of imports stuff from the Northeast. A lot of interconnection of economics, people, etc. Well, one of the things is basketball. Basketball is a big deal in the Midwest. A lot of small Midwestern colleges still do very well. High school, more than 100 years ago, is when the tournament in Illinois begins with the Illinois High School Association, and they have almost, at some point when it's peak in the 20s and 30s, almost 1,000 teams would enter the tournament. Can you believe that? Talk about March Madness.
Wow,
so this term March Madness starts to get used because it's incredible, a lot of coverage. Remember, you don't have pro leagues that's established the same way at that point. College basketball isn't on national TV yet. You don't even have TV yet. So it becomes this huge sort of draw for a great show. Well, eventually, in the 70s and 80s, there's a book that comes out, there's a film that comes out referring to it as March Madness, and the Illinois High School Association actually had the trademark for March Madness until in 1982, Brett Musburger, a famous sportscaster, says March Madness, and it starts this kind of thing of, well, who can use March Madness? And there's this whole deal where for a while the trademark was shared between the NCAA and Illinois, but the point is, that's where March Madness begins in high school, with that huge tournament in Illinois and exports to college.
And when you say 1,000 teams, there is where you look at what sports really means, right? There's the competition with the players and the teams and the schools, but it's a community driver as well.
And what a wild thing, because remember, this is single game elimination. Anything can happen. So think about March Madness the way we think of it in the last 40 years in a college game. And of course, the NCAA March Madness has changed too. It started originally almost 100 years ago with 8 teams. Today it's 68 if you include the kind of playing games. I mean, we still got a ways to go to get to 1,000 teams, but it goes to show you that actually it's never too big with single elimination. And in recent years, we've had some of the biggest upsets. And of course, women's college basketball right now is shining as well, because we got a couple of stars there with Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese. Right now, tickets are selling out, and they're a draw, they're a show. And so college basketball, I think, is really hot right now because there are so many teams that can compete.
And down south, where football's king, basketball's king for us too. You mentioned basketball started in the Midwest, but we've had several Texas schools in March Madness: University of Houston, University of Texas, Baylor, A&M, TCU.
Well, University of Houston has some legends. Don't forget Clyde Drexler and Hakeem Olajuwon, who then come into NBA and also win in Houston.
They didn't win in March Madness. They said, "That's okay. We see you in a little bit." Right? Hakeem Olajuwon, came back, did those back-to-backs in Houston, 94, 95, and of course between that went to the Olympics.
That's right. And now don't forget Kevin Durant, University of Texas. Don't forget University of Houston was recently in the Final Four as well. Baylor recently on the men's side won the title once, and in women 3 times in the last 20. So you have a lot of rich history both in college and NBA here in Texas. Now look, I was a kid growing up in the sort of 90s and in the early 2000s, right? So I remember Hakeem Olajuwon and Clyde Drexler on the Rockets. I don't remember them before that. And one of my favorite young players was Shaquille O'Neal when he was on the Magic, and he had that footwork, right?
Yeah.
The footwork, the Hakeem, they call it the dream to shake, right? And what's really cool about that is it goes to show you that, again, we were talking about earlier for sports, how important skill is. In that case, it's not just about size, it's about footwork and skill. And basketball is so intricate that way. Remember when we talked about Bill Russell and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, the intellectual aspect of it? Right. Well, guys like Kobe or Hakeem, who are focused on not just the physical performance, but applying themselves mentally and intellectually to the sport, are going to succeed.
And I'm going to round it out with that point that you said. Yeah, the athlete who's the superb athlete, but also great minds. Clyde Drexler was with us not long ago, and he just said, basketball was a means to an end for him. Like when he was in college during the off season, he got an internship in banking because he wanted to study finances, right? So he would finish this great basketball run at U of H, and then he would put on his suit and he would go in, and of course Hakeem Olajuwon, Clyde Drexler, both of them extremely successful, and took those paychecks in the NBA and applied it toward their next goal in life.
That approach is what helps them both in the game, because it's no surprise to me that Clyde, who had that kind of approach to life, was also a great point guard in his case, which is a particularly head-oriented, kind of a strategy-oriented position. And speaking of which, I'll go back to Bill Russell for a moment. He was at some point a player coach, which is really fascinating. But again, shows you that that when they're thinking a lot strategically, how Bill Russell, one of the greatest of all time, arguably the greatest ever.
It's a full package.
Now, by the way, I'll say as a quick aside, when Bill Russell started coaching was actually a recent thing in basketball. Early in the game, there was no coaching allowed during the game. It was not until 1949 that coaching in the game was allowed in basketball, and Bill Russell coaches shortly after that. So really fascinating to think about how the game evolves.
Oh, wait, ring. What was that? Oh, Michael Jordan on the phone. He said, "Which one was the greatest of all time?"
That's right.
Yeah. All right. Raffi, thank you so much.
Of course.
And people, let me just say, all that information is in the head just about basketball. You want to ask him about anything in history, he knows all of it. Thank you.
For proof that I love basketball. Here's my wallet as a kid. I still have it. It's a basketball on the outside. It does not wear out. See, the inside wears out because it's getting old, but I don't dribble it, so the outside does not wear out. Since I was a kid, shows you how much I love basketball.
This one right here, nothing but net. For more on historian Raffi Andonian, or to book him as a speaker for one of your events, go to greatdayhouston.com and we'll connect you.